initiative. People are staying home because they want to protect their own health. They want to protect the health of their loved ones, which is only common sense, and they want to follow the law of the state of Washington. You know, the impact of COVID-19 has been severe in our state. All of us Washingtonians have had to make hard decisions of one type and another. Not everyone agrees with decisions that I have made, and that's fine in a democracy. But every decision I have made is designed to protect the health of Washingtonians, and we have seen hundreds of deaths in our state, and we cannot continue to allow that pandemic to ravage our state. So our stay home, stay healthy order is the law of the state of Washington, and it will remain the law of the state of Washington till we make a further decision, which will be based on data and science. So our office will not be guided by irrational forces that would really gamble with our health. And if we placed that bet and lost, we would be giving up the hard-won gains that we've already made because of the dedication of Washingtonians to this order. Now, I have said, and I think it's really important to realize, there has been huge buy-in and compliance to this effort, really across the state of Washington. It's been quite remarkable. I'm trying to think of another time where Washingtonians have been so committed to their joint welfare to try to prevent needless death. In fact, to my knowledge, there's only had to be filed one action to assure compliance with the stay home, stay healthy order. And that was against a California company that so far has in Tacoma, or operating in Tacoma, that has refused to honor the moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent. So law enforcement really has not been necessary to do what we have to do, which is to use our heads to protect ourselves from this virus. But these orders will be enforced if that is necessary. We have a three-step process for enforcing these orders, and it starts with education. We then work with licensing agencies to encourage compliance, and then local law enforcement as well. And only as a very last resort do we have to seek legal action to obtain compliance. And it's our goal to have voluntary compliance in every single case. In the rare event, and so far this has only happened once to my knowledge, we have the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, the State Patrol, other local law enforcement agencies to make sure that these orders are followed. Earlier today, I sent a letter to the Franklin County Commission about some of the actions they took Tuesday, and I made clear that those actions really intentionally and knowingly violated the state law, and so they'll have to change. And we really cannot equivocate on this point. And we cannot have individual law enforcement officers arbitrarily decide which laws they're going to enforce and which laws they're not going to enforce. If people have disagreements with the law, that can be decided by the courts, not by any individual law enforcement officer. So there were some comments Tuesday night by the sheriff of Snohomish County that are not supported by that county's prosecuting attorney, and Adam Cornell, and he issued a statement today. I just want to read from it because I think it really encapsulates what's at stake here. Adam said, quote, "We are elected to serve under the laws, not to act above them. An earnest desire to change the law is much different than refusing to enforce it." And I agree with that. I think it's a very clear statement of what our democracy needs at this moment. The Snohomish County Health District, as I believe, also issued a statement about the importance of us being in compliance with the Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative. And no court anywhere in this state or federally has said in any way that this order contravenes the Constitution or any other law that's pertinent to our state. I do think encouraging illegal activity jeopardizes the health of people in our communities. It also puts them in potential legal jeopardy. Businesses and individuals are required to follow the state's lawful order under COVID-19. And so far, millions, literally, of Washingtonians are doing just that. And we're going to continue to reach out to these jurisdictions to make sure that there is clarity about the orders, as well as the underlying legal and constitutional grounds that give the governor's office authority to impose restrictions to protect the health of Washingtonians in emergencies. I also appreciate the cooperation of local jurisdictions who originally have had some questions about the orders. We've seen some local jurisdictions like the City of Linden and Chelan County and Douglas County who've issued resolutions or guidance to allow for construction in a way that they believed was consistent with our orders. And when my office contacted them to express concerns about their interpretation, they were willing to rescind their orders and work with our office. And I appreciate their cooperation and good faith efforts. And these are examples of strong leadership. And we've had just a handful of other situations where we've had a couple businesses who originally did not want to comply with the order. And when they've received a call from other folks, they saw the light and the reason why this made sense, and to my knowledge are now in compliance with the Stay Home, Stay Healthy statewide initiative, and we appreciate that. So we want Washingtonians to continue to take care of themselves and their neighbors. Look, this has been working. This is saving lives. There are people alive today because of the work we've done jointly in the state of Washington. And I'm confident we're going to continue this good work because that makes sense. It's what science indicates, and it shows our love for our community and our families. Now is not the time to give up. With that, happy to stand for questions.
Governor, last night you mentioned some areas where potential change could come sooner, like construction and elective surgery. You didn't give a timeline. Can you offer the public any more specific information, like if metric X is hit for this many days, Y can happen? And then on a separate topic, California's governor said today that he was promised 100,000 testing swabs by President Trump this week and more than double that amount next week. Did you receive any similar commitment today?
I've not talked to the president about that, and we'll make sure I talk to Governor Newsom about his information. We have not received commitments, to my knowledge, in that. Now, we'll have to check with the emergency command folks to see if they've received any particular assurance. We do have a substantial order of swabs that we believe are headed our way in the million swab magnitude. And we are really looking forward to the first shipment. I'm not sure the first shipment of that actually has been received. We think this is going to serve us well for a few weeks, but we will need additional sources after that. And as I've said, I have on repeated occasions urged the president to use his authority to increase the production of these swabs so all of us states, Republican and Democrat governors, can have what we need. And we have said this, and Republicans have been insistent on this as well as I have. So I think that's great if there was a commitment to California, but we do need to have increased manufacture of all of this equipment in the millions. Now, in my last conversation, the Vice President was on the line, and there was some information about the production level that the administration thought would take place in June and July. But I did the math, and assuming there was an equitable distribution, that would only be about a third as much as we need in the state of Washington. So there is still a continuing need for increased federal production of these test kits, and we hope the president will follow our advice of Republican and Democratic governors to get on the ball and start making these test kits. We desperately need this. I heard New York talking about this morning, so we hope that that will happen. Your first question about timelines, yes. The timeline, the most immediate timeline is that we hope tomorrow we will receive additional modeling from the Institute for Disease Modeling, and we hope that that's going to show some improvement that data for the last 3 days suggested. And if it does, we think we can make some statements fairly shortly after that as to when some of these things could happen, a different interpretation of what surgery we can start, the ability to restart residential construction under very good hygiene. And those are things that we hope to be able to say very shortly after Thursday, assuming, this is under the assumption that the data comes back as the way we hope it will. Now, as far as metrics, I think we do have some metrics. I know people have asked this question. The metrics, many people have followed Donald Trump on this, and that's their choice. But people need to understand that Donald Trump's metrics that he has given the nation clearly show that we cannot release this Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative, clearly, because his own metrics, which was designed by his own physicians, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, their own metrics show we cannot release this right now because they require 14 days of clear reduction of infections, and we have not experienced that, and we've got a long ways to go to experience that. So the president's own metrics are not being complied with. Some states are ignoring those metrics, and I think that's a big mistake because we will lose lives if we were to do that.
Next question, we go to Joe with the Seattle Times.
Our House Minority Leader J.T. Wilcox has said he's frustrated that your office hasn't been more transparent about some of the actions on, why some activities are essential and not others, as well as all the metrics you're using to make your decisions. And Minority Leader said this morning he's not going to vote to sign off on extensions of emergency orders beyond May 4th unless you address some of that further. So I'm curious if you've had a chance to speak with him and if you're considering addressing that and how so.
Well, we would be happy to share all of the data that we have. I think I've been very open, not just with the representative, but with the public. We've had repeated meetings with you, and you can convey this information to the public. I don't know why he hasn't not seen the data. I have shared multiple graphs with him. We've shown the Institute for Health Metrics. That's available on websites. I have shown it to him through you and personally to him. We've had a four-corner discussion where that data was specifically put right in front of him, so I'm not sure what he's referring to. The Institute for Disease Modeling data that we've shown him repeatedly, we have shown him probably 10 to 12 graphs that daily are updated on the Department of Health website. So I will ask him again what it is that he would like, and we will try to comply. But unfortunately, I'm afraid the situation is that some folks have decided to follow the siren demands of Donald Trump rather than the health of Washingtonians, and that's what's at stake here.
Next question comes from Simone with Q13.
Hi, Governor. You talked about irrational forces at the beginning of your speech today. Are you talking about Sheriff Fortney and others? And did they refuse to enforce the stay-home measures and say, we see in Snohomish County, for instance, all of a sudden people start coming out and going in public and going to churches or something like that? Would you send in local law or state patrol or other types of law enforcement if local law enforcement refuses to enforce the order?
Well, first off, as I've said many times, I don't believe that will be necessary. And I think the best proof of that is that Washingtonians, enormous percentages of Washingtonians are complying with this Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative. And the reason is they're convinced, as I have been convinced by the data and the medical information, that it is simply too dangerous to do otherwise. Too many people die. Too many tears are shed. And so Washingtonians are voting on this by complying with this order in enormous numbers. And as I've indicated, there's only had to have been one single law enforcement action, and that was against a landlord who was threatening eviction to people for non-payment of rent. So I really don't believe that's going to happen. Now, we've had just a handful of folks that took a phone call. You know, there was, I think, a pizza parlor in Spokane that wasn't happy about this. They didn't close right away. So somebody in the local jurisdiction, I believe, had to call them and say, you know, you got to help out. You got to help the team here. This is dangerous. And they came in compliance. So this has been really a smooth operation. But people do need to understand that there is possible criminal law enforcement in the event that people still won't get on the team. And that could be through Bob Ferguson, the AG, through the State Patrol, or other local law enforcement. But it should not come to that. This is a team effort of a team that's doing great work, and we should not get that derailed by anybody's statements.
Next, we go to Jim with the spokesman review.
Governor, sort of a technical question, but you mentioned that if you take the restrictions off and the data starts going the other way again, you might have to put restrictions back on. I'm wondering, is that one day of bad data, a couple days of bad data, a week of bad data? How would you make that determination?
Well, this is where it's really difficult for the public. It's difficult for me as governor, because there are data questions there that we can't even understand potentially in the future. And there is no metric to be able to give you 3.5 as opposed to 8.4. We have to make decisions based on multiple metrics. We have to use our judgment about when we are creating too big of a risk to Washingtonians. And that's largely based on what we value, which is our health, what we value, which is our economy, what we value is our Constitution. And we have to think about those things and then make value-based judgments. So there is no governor today, I believe, who can give you some sort of algorithm of what would happen in July if we allowed this to come off too soon and then the virus came back. There's just no way to do that. What I can tell you is that the decisions we have made to date so far, I think we should have confidence, have been good decisions. And the reason I say that is they have been successful in bending the curve down so that our state does not suffer the horrific results that New York has, for instance. We have done so because of the enormous goodwill and good faith of Washingtonians who want to care for themselves and others. That's why this is working. And we've done it repeatedly by looking at the science and looking at the data, and then making good judgments. And I would suggest that so far, those decisions have borne us out very well. I don't think we should abandon those concepts right now, and I'm glad to be working for Washington.
Next question comes from Christopher with KEPR.
Already touched on your hope that sheriffs and commissioners will fall into line, but they say they're reading the Constitution differently over here in Eastern Washington. Health risks aside, what's at stake for the folks voting for and agreeing with them? What's going to happen to them if they don't follow?
Well, first off, I'd point out is, look, disagreements important, honored. People are entitled to their opinions. What they're not entitled to be the ultimate decider about the Constitution. We have a process to answer questions about that. It's the judicial system. And ultimately, the Supreme Court is the group that can make the decisions about these disagreements. Law enforcement officers who I have huge respect for, who thousands of them today are not going off half-cocked and saying they're not going to enforce the law. They're enforcing the law. There's just two of them that I know of that want to make a political statement. But for whatever talents they have, they just are not given the right in our democracy to make a decision about the Constitution. That is a decision we leave to the courts, and that system has worked us very well for a couple hundred years now, and we need to continue to do that. It is impossible to have a working democracy if everybody gets to decide what they think the Constitution is just for them, and that's not going to work for us. So we hope people will reconsider about this. Other leaders have, as I've indicated, across the state. We've got the same Constitution for all points of our state. Now, as far as what will happen to people, look, the thing that we worry about is we don't want people to get sick. That's ultimately, we don't want Washingtonians to get sick. That's what this is all about. And the more people who will comply, the less people who will get sick. That's the most important result, is not letting somebody die in your family.
Next question comes from Jerry with the Everett Herald.
I would like to go back to a moment on the issue of the transparency and the metrics. In my conversations with folks Sunday at the Capitol and in the days since, there seems to be a feeling that the goalposts may be moving. They listened a month ago, they heard about flattening the curve, watching the data, watching the decline, but they've also seen big businesses open and little ones are closed. They see other states are allowing industries that aren't allowed in Washington. And they're just trying to sort out now really what is driving the ability for public contractors to put in a road, but residential contractors not do an addition on a house, why Home Depot and Boeing can open, but not a hair salon. What are the metrics you use in those instances? How do you decide that 30,000 can work, but 2 or 3 cannot?
Well, to start with, public contractors aren't working for the state of Washington because I've ordered them not to on a safety basis. And I don't quite understand their concern when they pointed to my speech last night as a reason to be obstreperous, when we basically said we are hopeful to be able to open up residential construction. And the reason we're hopeful about that is that we hope the numbers will be good in the next couple days. And we have found a way, we think, so that we can increase the safety for construction workers that we should care about. So we're trying to head in that direction, and I made that clear in my comments last night. Now, look, it is a challenge to try to figure out what essential businesses are. We have tried to make the best decisions and the fairest decisions we possibly can to make sure that people had food and clothing and pharmaceuticals, and that the entire economy of Washington State would not collapse. So we have made some decisions with those parameters in mind. They have been the best decisions that we can make, and I think fundamentally have been good ones. We still have an aerospace industry. We decided not to eliminate the aerospace industry. Why? Because it's a fundamental tenet and pillar of the state of Washington. And it's one that would be extremely difficult to stand up again in the event it collapsed. Now, when you get into decisions of different businesses, I understand that people have arguments about things that they think should be in or out. I understand that. And we have done the best job we can to save lives and keep some economy working so people can eat in the state of Washington.
Next question comes from Keith with Como.
Governor, federal lawsuit is being filed against your order. What do you say to the people, especially in churches, the religious organizations who say they can gather, they can do it safely? What do you tell them?
Well, we specifically in our order made sure that people of gatherings of any type, including religious gatherings, can continue to gather electronically as we are doing in so many contexts. And that has been very successful. Talking to people in the faith community, they have found ways, because we put it in our order that they would be able to maintain the crew in the church necessary to run the electronic system. And that's working. So people have been able to worship. They have been able to electronically congregate. And I think that's great, because it's important to people to be able to do so. But what we have found is that significant gatherings have not been able to maintain social distancing in many, many accounts. And that's very difficult, because we are very social animals, so to speak. And the danger of this is apparent. I think all of us are aware of the church choir, I believe is in Skagit County, where I think something like 45 people went to a church choir and 45 people of a group of like 60 became infected with COVID. So the answer to that is it's just too dangerous. And we issued an order that I am very confident is compliant with the Constitution in many, many ways.
Next question comes from Jim with the News Tribune.
Governor, some people have called for loosening restrictions. Others have questioned why restrictions are on the verge of being loosened. The State Department of Health put out an article a couple days ago, and it started with, quote, "The coming months will bring slow, measured relaxation of our physical distancing interventions. Even with a slow, phased reopening of the state, we are likely to see COVID-19 spike again. We may open our doors only to close them again in a matter of months." So does that sound like the road ahead in terms of Washington? And is there a way to prepare people for that possible reality?
Well, I hope not. I hope that we maintain the Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative in the appropriate way for the length of time it's necessary to drive the number of infections down to a low enough level that we can then tame this beast by using testing and contact tracing and isolation. That is the strategy. I believe there's a reasonable chance that it will succeed because it's based on science. It's based on following the data that we look at every single day, that is available to the public, by the way. And when we look at that, we evaluate on a daily basis, will we be able to restrain this beast to prevent this spike coming back by using testing, contact tracing, and isolation? So far, we are not at that point. And someone who agrees with me in this regard is Donald Trump. And this is what's so kind of frustrating about this, that he's out there trying to whip up a fury for political reasons for something that his own experts say should not be done today, because we are not low enough to be able to have confidence that we'll be able to restrain that spike from coming back. Now, the second part of this is to build a fire brigade or COVID brigade to be able to respond to people who get positive notice and to isolate them. And we are building that directly. I got a good plan, another iteration of the plan from our health department today, where we're going to have 1,500 people, including members of the Washington National Guard, to work on that effort. So both those things have to happen. I think there is a good chance that we will continue without additional spikes in the future. But no governor or human can guarantee you that's not going to happen as well, given the unpredictable nature of this virus. And we got to stick together, we got to use our heads, and we got to make decisions based on science. And Washington's doing all three of those right now.
We have time for a few more. Next we go to Drew with King 5.
There are two questions. Tomorrow, the state Supreme Court will hear arguments on the lawsuit filed on behalf of the inmates saying that more needs to be done. Thousands more inmates need to be released to social distance inside the facilities. Do you think you've done enough in there? And I also wanted to ask about the West Seattle Bridge. Are you involved in that discussions as to fixing it, how we got there, or is that purely a Seattle problem?
Well, it's a statewide concern, obviously, because it's so important to our infrastructure. I have not been deeply involved about what led to this situation. I couldn't give you much insight of that. We will be interested in any way we can help. There is a potential of an infrastructure package we hope is going to be considered federally, and perhaps this can be part of that infrastructure package. We know it's a severe challenge, and we'll work with the city in any way that we can help. On the correctional situation, I think we have done some very meaningful things to try to reduce the risk of COVID-19. Now look, this is a risk everywhere in the state of Washington, including in our Department of Corrections. So we have had a very intentional plan before this got into our prisons as to what to do about it. And that's being implemented now to try to isolate people who are positive, to try to have adequate screening and testing, to try to reduce the transmission vectors of people coming into the prisons, and to try to, after it gets in the prisons, to try to isolate to the extent possible the people who end up being positive, and that's happening right now. But it was, I believe, reasonably appropriate to do some releases to give the system more space to be able to isolate people. And we made a decision about an appropriate level of people to do that. These are nonviolent offenders, and we believe it is a number that allows us to obtain what is necessary to have adequate physical space.
Okay. Next question comes from Hannah with Cairo Radio.
Hi, Governor. Just a couple of quick ones. One, you mentioned just a couple of questions ago, you felt there was I think I heard this right, a good chance that we won't see large spikes in cases moving forward. I wondered if you might be able to elaborate on why you think that. And then also, could you speak at all to the Institute for Health Metrics model? There's been some criticism from some epidemiologists about the use of that model by policymakers. Wondering if you can speak at all to how much you look towards that in making any of your decisions.
Well, we look at multiple data points, and the Institute's is one of them, but it is only one of them. And none of these models have to be taken as a certainty and they will tell you that, because it is a very new event. It's a new virus. And they are trying to collate experience on a daily basis to build into how data from around the world would affect Washington State. But there are other modelers that have different projections. The Institute for Disease Modeling has a fairly significant different projection as to the short-term course. Theirs is much more of a plateau rather than a decline, or at least a slower decline. So we try to take all of these into consideration. We ask the modelers what assumptions they use in building the models. I have spoken to the modelers myself so that I can understand what assumptions they're making, what algorithms they're using, and we try to make the best judgment that we can. Now, that feeds into your first question, though, is, you know, what can I tell people about a spike? Look, this is a period of uncertainty that is frustrating, but there is no person on earth today that A, can guarantee you that a spike will not happen, or B, can guarantee you that a spike will happen. I believe that if we stick with this stay home, stay healthy initiative, and if we build a very comprehensive and robust testing, contact tracing, and isolation program, that we have a good chance of not having great recovery. But I can't guarantee that. It would be ridiculous to try to do so. Now, the reason is because, yes, there have been some repeat, at least minor spikes. That's happened in Singapore, for instance. So it's a possibility, but I'm going to err on the hopeful side, and I'll tell you why. It's because Washingtonians are doing a really good job right now. And I think if we continue this, we ought to have confidence in our work.
Last question. Final question comes from Dee Dee with Cairo.
Hi, Governor. My question for you is on that issue. So we've heard from the State Department of Health saying that the plans for contact tracing aren't going to work if we don't have enough testing. If we only test a certain small percentage of the population, then there's no use to contact trace because we're just missing all these cases. Now, given the trouble with testing supplies, do you have concerns that by May 11th, when this is, really supposed to launch on a larger scale, that it could not even be worth launching a major branch of your plan to slowly reopen the economy, that the lack of supplies could hinder this plan?
Well, it would be worth doing whatever testing we can do and whatever contact tracing and isolation we can do. We should do that at any level because it will prevent, at whatever level you can do it, certain numbers of infections. So we should do it in any extent. But yes, I do have concerns about having the appropriate number of test kits, and this is why I've been so urging the President to act in this regard. Now, at the moment, if we have an order that we've been placed to receive swabs, which is the greatest shortage for these test kits right now, if that order comes in on a timely basis, I think we're going to have probably in the next several weeks the number of test kits that we need to really do the job. So cross your fingers, hope that that order gets here in time so we can do the full meal deal. But going forward in the months after that, we will have to obtain another much more stable source of these test kits, and that's why we need federal help. With that, take care, wash your hands.